What if everything people thought they knew about Team USA was just proven wrong in one single game? Because what happened against Italy didn't just change the scoreboard. It exposed something much bigger. Something that's been quietly building under the surface of this entire tournament. Team USA came into this matchup looking like one of the most stacked rosters ever assembled. Star power everywhere. Elite scorers. Veteran playmakers. On paper, this game shouldn't have even been close. But for most of the first quarter, it was. The offense looked slow. Predictable. Almost stuck. Possessions dragged on longer than they should. The ball wasn't moving with purpose. And somehow Italy, a team they were expected to control comfortably, was right there, matching them step for step. And that's when things started to feel off. Because this wasn't about missing shots. This wasn't just a cold stretch. This looked like a team that didn't have an identity in that moment. Like a group of great players who hadn't quite figured out how to function together when things weren't going perfectly. Then, without warning, one substitution changed everything. Caitlin Clark steps onto the floor. And within seconds, the entire energy of the game shifts. The pace jumps. The spacing opens. The decisions get sharper. Suddenly, the same players who looked stuck just moments ago are moving with confidence, finding rhythm, getting cleaner looks. And then it happens. A shot from deep. Not just beyond the arc, from logo range. The kind of shot that forces an entire defense to rethink everything it planned before the possession even started. It drops. And just like that, the game isn't the same anymore. But here's the part nobody expected. Somewhere in the middle of this performance, while Clark was completely changing the flow of the game, something else was quietly happening behind the scenes. A shift that didn't get announced. A decision that didn't get explained. But one that might actually be just as important as what we saw on the court. Because by the time this game was over, it wasn't just about a win. It was about what the numbers revealed. It was about what the rotations suggested. And it was about a question that suddenly got a lot harder to ignore. Is Caitlin Clark already the most important player on Team USA? Because after what just happened, that doesn't sound like a hot take anymore. For a team built like this, there are certain things that just aren't supposed to happen. You're not supposed to come out flat. You're not supposed to struggle to generate offense. And you're definitely not supposed to be locked in a tight game early against a team you clearly outmatch on paper. But that's exactly what was happening. From the opening minutes, something felt off. The ball was moving, but not with purpose. Players were getting into their spots, but nothing was developing cleanly. Every possession looked like it needed an extra second. And at this level, that's all a defense needs. Instead of attacking, Team USA looked like they were waiting. Waiting for a play to develop. Waiting for someone to make something happen. Waiting for the defense to make a mistake. But Italy wasn't giving them anything. They stayed disciplined. They read the passing lanes. They didn't overcommit. And because of that, every offensive set from Team USA started to feel predictable. You could almost see where the ball was going before it got there. That's when things started to stall. The half-court offense slowed down. The spacing tightened. Players who are normally aggressive began to hesitate, just for a split second. And that hesitation spread. One player holds the ball too long. The next player receives it a step late, and suddenly the entire possession is broken. And the scoreboard reflected it. Not a blowout. Not a comfortable lead. Just tied. And that's what made it so strange. Because this wasn't a lack of talent issue. You had elite players on the floor. Shot creators. Playmakers. Scorers who have proven themselves at the highest levels. But instead of looking like a dominant unit, they looked like individuals trying to figure it out in real time. Italy, on the other hand, looked settled. They weren't doing anything extraordinary. No crazy runs. No unstoppable scoring streaks. They were just consistent, playing within their system, taking advantage of every small hesitation they saw. And for a moment, it felt like the game was being played on their terms. That's the part nobody expected. Because when Team USA starts to lose control of tempo like that, it usually means something deeper is off. Not effort, not talent, something structural, something about how the game is being run. And as the minutes passed, that question started to get louder. Who is actually controlling this offense? Because at that point, it didn't feel like anyone was. And that's exactly why what happened next stood out so much. The shift didn't build slowly. There was no gradual adjustment. No long stretch where things started to click piece by piece. It happened almost instantly. Caitlin Clark checks in, and within seconds, the entire rhythm of the game changes. The first thing you notice isn't even the scoring. It's the pace. Before she stepped on the floor, Team USA looked like they were trying to solve a puzzle. Every possession felt calculated, but slow. After she checked in, that hesitation disappeared. The ball started moving earlier in the clock. Decisions were made faster. Italy didn't have time to get fully set before the next action was already happening. And that alone changed everything. Because now, instead of reacting to the defense, Team USA was forcing the defense to react to them. Clark wasn't waiting for plays to develop. She was reading the floor in real time, seeing openings before they fully formed. A defender leans the wrong way for half a second. The ball is already gone. A lane starts to open, she's already attacking it. And suddenly, players who looked stuck just minutes ago were getting the ball in completely different situations. Not standing still. Not late in the shot clock. But in motion. In rhythm. With space. Then comes the moment that really flips the game. Clark brings the ball up, barely across half court. No hesitation. No overthinking. She pulls up from deep logo range. It's the kind of shot most players wouldn't even consider in that situation. It drops clean. And just like that, Italy's entire defensive approach has a problem. Because now they have to respect her range at a completely different level. They can't sit back. They can't pack the paint. They can't cheat off screens the way they were just doing a few possessions earlier. They have to extend. And the second they do that, everything opens up. Driving lanes appear. Passing angles widen. Pick-and-roll actions become harder to contain. Help defense has to travel farther, which means rotations come a step slower. And Clark is already ahead of all of it. She pushes in transition, finding cutters before the defense can even match up. She draws attention, then moves the ball at the exact moment a defender commits. She takes a step back, hits another jumper, and forces Italy to reset again. It's not just one play. It's a sequence. A constant pressure that never lets the defense settle. And that's what makes it so noticeable. Because the same team that looked stuck earlier now looks completely in control. The same players who were hesitating are now reacting instinctively. Everything feels cleaner, faster, more connected. And the most important part? This isn't coming from a set play. It's coming from one player dictating the flow. You could feel it watching live. This wasn't just a hot stretch. This wasn't just a few shots going in. This was control. The kind of control that changes how an entire game is played. And while the scoreboard started to shift, the real impact was happening underneath it. Because what Clark was doing in those minutes wasn't something you fully understand just by looking at points. If you only looked at the box score, you might think this was just a solid performance. 12 points, 5 assists, efficient minutes off the bench. Good numbers, but nothing that immediately screams dominance. And that's exactly where most people would miss what actually happened. Because the real story isn't in the points. It's in one number that completely changes how you see the game. Plus minus. While Caitlin Clark was on the floor, Team USA outscored Italy by 27 points. In just 22 minutes. Let that sit for a second. 22 minutes of game time, and a 27-point swing. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. When she wasn't on the floor, that number dropped. Not slightly. Not by a point or two. By double digits. The team was still winning, but they were 11 points less effective without her. Same players. Same opponent. Same game. Completely different impact. And that's what plus minus actually captures. It's not just about scoring. It's not about highlights. It's about what happens to the entire team when a player is on the court. Every possession. Every defensive stop. Every offensive sequence. It measures control. And in this game, that control clearly shifted depending on one thing. Whether Clark was playing or not. You could see it without even looking at the stat. When she was out there, everything had direction. The offense moved with purpose. Players knew where to be. The defense was constantly reacting. When she sat, that edge softened. The pace slowed. The structure loosened just enough for Italy to breathe again. That difference is the part you can't ignore. Because this isn't about preference. It's not about opinion. It's not even about style. It's measurable. And when one player creates that kind of gap in the same game, against the same opponent, with the same teammates around her, it starts to answer questions people were still debating before this matchup. Questions about role. Questions about usage. Questions about whether she should be leading this team or just fitting into it. After this game, those questions don't sound the same anymore. Because when the numbers show a gap that clear, it stops being a discussion. It starts becoming a conclusion. And if this was just one game, maybe you could still question it. Maybe you could say it was a good matchup. Maybe Italy just didn't adjust well. Maybe it was just one of those nights where everything clicked at the right time. But it's not just one game. When you zoom out and look at the entire tournament, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Across all 3 games, Caitlin Clark isn't just contributing, she's leading. She leads Team USA in assists. She's tied for first in scoring. She leads the team in free throws. And most importantly, she has the highest plus-minus on the entire roster. Not second, not close, first. Which means when you track actual impact, not just stats that look good on paper, but the stats that directly connect to winning, the same name keeps showing up at the top. Every single time. And it doesn't stop at Team USA. Expand it even further. Across every team, every player, every game played in this entire qualifying tournament. Clark leads all of them in plus-minus. Think about that. Not just the best on her team, the most impactful player in the entire field. And she's doing it while coming off the bench. That's the part that makes this feel different. Because usually, when a player is producing at this level, the system is built around them. They're starting. They're getting the majority of the touches. The offense runs through them by design. That's not what's happening here. She's entering games mid-flow and still becoming the central force that everything revolves around. Then there's the assist record. 19 assists in 3 games. Already the most in a single FIBA qualifying tournament in history. The record is already broken, and there are still games left to play. So now you have a player who is first in assists on her team, tied for first in scoring, first in free throws, first in plus-minus on the roster, first in plus-minus across the entire tournament, and the all-time leader in assists for this event, all while not even starting. At that point, it stops feeling like a breakout performance. It starts feeling like something much bigger. Because when every meaningful metric points to the same player, over and over again, it forces a shift in how you look at everything around them. Roles start to feel different. Rotations start to raise questions. Decisions start to get examined more closely. And that's where things begin to get uncomfortable. Because if the data is this clear, then some of the choices being made around it don't make as much sense anymore. And this is where the story stops being just about performance and starts becoming something a lot more complicated. Because while all of this was happening on the court, the impact, the numbers, the clear shift when Clark was playing, the way she was being used didn't always match what everyone was seeing. And people noticed. It really started after that earlier game where Clark put up historic numbers. A performance that should have been the headline by itself. But instead of that moment being fully embraced, the response from the coaching side felt different. There was a message that came out. Not directly against her. Not openly critical. But it carried a tone that didn't sit right with a lot of people watching. The idea was simple. Everyone needs to shine. On the surface, that sounds completely reasonable. This is Team USA. A roster full of stars. Of course the goal is balance. But that's not how it landed. Because the numbers weren't showing a balanced situation. They were showing one player clearly driving the offense. One player consistently creating the best outcomes. And instead of leaning into that, it felt like the approach was trying to spread things out, even if it meant pulling away from what was working best. That's when the question started. Was this about maintaining a system, or was it about limiting a player who was changing that system too quickly? Then came the Puerto Rico game. And this is where things really stood out. Puerto Rico ran a defensive scheme specifically designed to take Clark out of the game. A box-and-one. A strategy that focuses almost entirely on neutralizing one player. So naturally, the expectation was simple. Adjust. Move her around. Use her as a decoy. Let her create through movement. Put the ball in her hands in different situations. Force the defense to react. But that's not what happened. Instead, the offense shifted away from her. She was kept more on the perimeter. The flow of the game moved through other players. And the result was immediate. The pace slowed down. The spacing got tighter. The offense started to feel clunky. That's not speculation. That's how it looked. That's how it felt watching it unfold. Even Clark herself described the game that way. And despite still getting the win, the performance raised more concerns than confidence, because it looked like a team trying to avoid its most effective option, in a situation where that option was exactly what they needed. That's when the reaction started building. Fans were questioning it. Analysts were pointing it out. Media conversations started shifting from performance to decision-making. People began asking a very direct question. Was Clark being used correctly? Or was she being held back? And no matter which way you answered that, neither option looked great. Because if she wasn't being used correctly, that's a coaching issue. And if she was being intentionally limited, that opens a completely different conversation. Either way, the pressure was building. And then, without any big announcement, without any clear explanation, something changed. The difference wasn't subtle. There was no slow adjustment, no gradual tweak to the system over time. It looked like someone watched everything that happened in the previous game and decided to flip the approach completely. And the moment the Italy game started to unfold, you could see it. The rotations were different. The roles were clearer. And most importantly, the offense had a direction. When Caitlin Clark entered the game this time, there was no hesitation about how she would be used. No standing off to the side. No waiting for someone else to initiate. She had the ball. She was running the offense. And everything flowed from that decision. Instead of working around her, the system was built through her. And the effect was immediate. The pace picked up again. But this time, it wasn't just a spark off the bench. It was structured, intentional. Players knew where to be. Cuts were happening at the right time. Spacing actually made sense. It didn't feel like a group searching for answers anymore. It felt like a team executing a plan. And that plan had a clear center. Clark wasn't just creating moments. She was organizing everything. Bringing the ball up, reading the defense early, deciding where the play was going before it even fully developed. And because of that, everyone else started to look more comfortable. The ball didn't stick. The offense didn't stall. There was a rhythm to every possession that simply wasn't there before. And the result? A 34-point blowout. Same roster. Same opponent tier. Completely different outcome. That's the part that's hard to ignore. Because when a team goes from struggling to control the game to completely dominating it, after a clear shift in how one player is used, it raises a bigger question than just strategy. It points to understanding. Understanding what actually works. And more importantly, being willing to adjust to it. After the game, there were comments about experimenting with rotations, about letting players run longer stretches, about building chemistry and creativity. And that all sounds fine. But when you line it up with what actually happened on the floor, it becomes clear that this wasn't just experimentation. This was correction. A recognition that the previous approach wasn't maximizing what the team had. And once that adjustment was made, the difference showed up immediately. Because instead of trying to balance everything evenly, they leaned into what was working best. They gave the offense a clear leader. They allowed the pace to be dictated instead of controlled. And suddenly, everything clicked, which makes the contrast even more noticeable. Because now you've seen both versions. One where the system limits the flow, and one where the system unlocks it. And after a result like this, it's hard to go back. And once that shift happened, something else started to take shape that might be even more important than the win itself. You could see the identity of the team changing in real time. Because it wasn't just about Caitlin Clark running the offense. It was about who she was running it with, and how quickly that connection started to click. The chemistry with Paige Buchers stood out immediately. Not in a loud way. Not in a highlight reel only kind of way. But in the details. Clark pushes the ball up the floor. And before the defense even fully rotates, Buchers is already cutting into space. The pass arrives exactly where it needs to be. Right on time, right on target. No hesitation. No second guessing. It looked like two players seeing the same play unfold at the exact same speed. And that's not something that usually happens this quickly. These are players still building chemistry, still learning tendencies, still figuring out timing. But in that game, it didn't feel like that. It felt natural. And once that connection started working, everything around it became harder to defend. Then you add another layer. The three-guard lineup. Clark, Buchers, Kelsey Plum. 3 players who can all handle the ball, all make decisions, all score from anywhere on the floor. Now the defense has a different problem, because there's no obvious point to attack. You can't just focus on one player. You can't predict where the next action is coming from. And you definitely can't afford to hesitate because the ball is already moving before you recover. That lineup didn't just create offense. It forced chaos. And Team USA was finally the team creating that chaos instead of reacting to it. But with that shift came another change that didn't go unnoticed. Roles started to adjust. Minutes shifted. And not everyone was being used the same way anymore. Angel Reese's role, in particular, looked different. In the previous game, she had moments where the offense was actually running through her as a ball handler. And that created situations that slowed everything down. The reads weren't as quick. The decisions took longer. The spacing collapsed more easily. Against Italy, that responsibility was pulled back. Her minutes were lower. Her role was more defined. The ball wasn't being forced into situations that didn't fit the flow of the game. And the difference was clear. This wasn't about one player being better than another. It was about fit. About putting players in positions where they could succeed within the system that was actually working. And that system, at this point, was obvious. Fast, guard-driven, decision-based, built on reading the defense before it fully sets. And at the center of that system was Clark. With Buchers alongside her, the offense didn't just function. It became difficult to predict, difficult to contain, and most importantly, difficult to stop. Because when multiple players are making the right read at the same time, the defense eventually runs out of answers. And that's exactly what Italy experienced. But this isn't just about one game. Because when a team starts to discover an identity like this, it usually doesn't stay contained to a single performance. It becomes a blueprint. And that's the part that might matter more than anything we've talked about so far. Because this doesn't just stay in one game. It doesn't even stay in this tournament. What you're watching here is a blueprint forming in real time. Think about what Caitlin Clark has actually done across these few games. She didn't just fit into Team USA. She forced the team to evolve around her. She's gone up against defenses specifically designed to slow her down. She's faced completely different styles of play from different countries. And instead of adjusting to them slowly, she's been solving them in real time. Faster reads, cleaner decisions, more control over the flow of the game. That kind of experience doesn't just disappear when the tournament ends. It carries over. And that's where things start to get really interesting. Because everything she's building here comes back with her. Back to the WNBA. Back to Indiana. And now you're not talking about a player who's just talented or just exciting to watch. You're talking about a player who has tested her game against international competition, figured out how to break it, and done it while setting records in the process. That changes things. The pace she's playing at now, that becomes normal. The level of defensive attention she's learning to handle, that becomes expected. The confidence that comes from knowing you can control games at this level, that doesn't fade. It grows. And if the Indiana Fever were already building around her, this version of Clark takes that to a completely different level. Because now you're not projecting what she might become. You're watching what she already is. A player who speeds the game up for everyone else. A player who makes teammates better just by being on the floor. A player who forces defenses to completely rethink their approach before the game even starts. And when you combine that with a full off-season, more time to build chemistry, more reps in a system that fits her strengths, you're looking at a version of this team that could be very different the next time we see them. Which brings everything back to the question that's been hanging over this entire tournament. Not about potential, not about future development, but about right now. Because when you look at the numbers, when you look at the impact, when you look at how the team actually functions with her on the floor, it becomes harder and harder to argue against it. This isn't about hype. This isn't about media narratives. This is about production. And that production is pointing in one direction. The debate about where Caitlin Clark stands on this team might already be over. Now it's just a matter of whether people are ready to accept it. So now the question shifts to you. After everything you just saw, the performance against Italy, the numbers across the tournament, the way the entire offense changes when she's on the floor, do you think Caitlin Clark is already the most important player on Team USA? Or do you think there's still something people are missing? Drop your opinion in the comments below, because this is one of those moments where the conversation is only getting bigger. And if you made it this far, you're clearly locked into this kind of content, breaking down what's really happening behind the headlines, not just what shows up on the surface. So here's the deal. If you want more videos like this, deeper analysis, real context, and the kind of insights most people overlook, make sure you hit subscribe right now. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you found this breakdown valuable, take 1 second and hit the like button. It helps push this video out so more people can actually see what's happening here. Because this story isn't slowing down. It's just getting started.